Okay guys, I just got home from a walk and there's a piece of furniture on the side of the road. Let's go see if it's still there. It's still there. Let's get it. Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back. In this episode, we are going to be doing a makeover on this curbside find that I just picked up. It's not in the best condition, but it's also not in the worst. It needs a bit of love, and we're going to see what we can do in this video. As you can tell, the bottom drawer is missing, but I have plans for that. So stick around and watch the process and enjoy the video. Let's get started. I start off by removing the drawers and numbering them so I know where to put them back. And this basic joint is just loose, and a few of them were, but we'll fix that up later. But we're going to strip this piece down with some paint stripper that I picked up at the local hardware store. I usually use 15-minute strip by Clean Strip, but they don't have any left in stock, so I'm using this 5-minute stripper, and it works pretty good for the paint, I must say. Simply explain my stripping process. I just throw a bucket at the end of the surface, and then I just use a metal scraper and just peel up the stripped surface, and then I just throw it into the bucket. Pretty simple. And you can tell I didn't get all of the white paint off on my first go, so let's apply another strip, another coat of stripper, and let's remove as much white paint as we can. So I take mineral spirits and just throw that on, and with some steel wool. I also use some sandpaper with this one just to remove as much stripper residue as I could. And after wiping that up with a rag, we're going to strip the sides. So we flip it to its side and do the same process. After stripping down the dresser, I moved on to the drawers, and I removed all the screws to the hardware, but the hardware was glued on and the paint was so thick that it was just held on perfectly. So basically I smacked it off with a hammer and a chisel, and it goes right in the bucket perfectly. And that deserves a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notifications. And then I continued to scrape off as much paint as I could. I'm guessing you're wondering what is under the paint, and this cream stuff, I am not sure what it was, but it would not come off easily. I took 60 grit to it with my orbital sander, and then I used my carbide scraper on the sides and throughout just to remove it. But if anyone has a clue what it is, please let me know in the comments, because it wouldn't come off with paint stripper. And honestly, it felt like cement trying to remove it. I used 60 and then 100 to remove it. As you can see, there's a huge chip in one of the drawers, so I just ripped the old piece of wood off, and we're just going to fill it in with some Bondo. After letting the Bondo completely dry, I use 100 grit sandpaper to get the Bondo down level. But I was hoping I wouldn't need a second coat of Bondo, but I did, so I throw that on so we can make the surface level. After letting the second coat dry, I start with 100 again, but I actually finish with 400 grit because using a high grit on Bondo, it transitions into the wood perfectly. After that, I use a knife just to clean up the paint and any glue that was around these joints where the drawer sliders and holders are. So I clean that up, and then I apply some new glue, and then I clamp it together just so the dresser is super sturdy. And yes, I've finally picked up a clamp. Woohoo! To make things even sturdier, I'm measuring to cut up some 2x3 just to add a stronger base, and it's a place where we will attach our new legs. So this is where the new base is going to be. So if you do the math correctly, we're going to have to cut the sides off this dresser. But first we're going to glue and screw in the base and get everything sturdy and strong before we do that. The process is simple. I apply the glue and then I use my 2.5-inch deck screws and I pre-drill into each piece of wood on each side, and then I just throw the screws in. That simple. Now the new base is on and things are super sturdy. I'm going to use my square, make some lines just so I know where to cut with my saw. And I use my utility knife to cut the back piece off. And since my cuts weren't perfect, I just sanded down everything flat. Where the original piece meets the new base, there was a gap, so I just filled in the entire piece with Bondo and also the knots on the 2x3, plus I filled in the screw holes. Then I sanded everything down with 100 grit, and then I finished off with 400. After my new base is sturdy and strong and smooth, I flip it over and we sand it one more time with 180 grit sandpaper just to make everything smooth before we start painting the piece. Before we apply paint, we're actually going to be staining some parts. So we're going to have some funky lines here where I'm using frog tape, and we're just going to make some unique shapes that I just randomly came up with. So where I cover up with tape is where we are going to have stain. After taping the top and the sides with some unique designs, I'm priming this piece with a Rust-Oleum flat black. I use my 220 grit sanding sponge after the primer dries to just make everything nice and smooth before we apply our paint. With all the dust, I then use a tack cloth and just wipe up all the black dust, and you can see how dirty it is. I'm using Fusion Mineral Paint in Ash. This is like a charcoal colored paint, and when you're applying this stuff, you want to make sure your brush is damp with water, so I just run it under the sink for a couple seconds and dry it off, and then it's ready to apply some paint. You want to make sure it's damp so the paint glides, and this pretty much makes less noticeable brush marks in your paint, because when the paint dries when you're brushing, it leaves these marks, and you really don't want those marks throughout your surface because it doesn't look smooth. A lot of people use just a spray container and water to keep things damp, but I find just damping it under the sink whenever it starts to go dry, it works perfect for me. You can't even see that a piece of 2x3 is even there. I also used my frog tape on the side of the drawers here just to give it a nice clean painted line. I did use my 220 grit sanding sponge in between coats of paint. I threw on 3 coats of paint because you can see the wood grain, but also that weird primer stuff that we were having issues with earlier, so 3 coats of paint hid that up pretty good. Now it's time to stain the piece. I'm using chestnut. This gel stain I purchased for another project but didn't use it, so I might as well use it up on this free project. I'm staining the top drawer and also the cool funky areas that we have taped off on the dresser. This isn't a veneer wood, this is solid wood, so it stains a lot differently. I want to say this is pine, but if you know what type of wood it is, feel free to let me know. So the color turned out decent. I didn't mind it. I think it will go nice with this project. Now finally we get to peel this tape away, and then we can get to staining the wood behind it. Usually this frog tape stuff works pretty good. I did have a few problems with the paint going through in certain areas, so I just took out my utility knife and just scraped the pieces away as best as I could. Once I was happy, I could finally apply the stain. After failing miserably trying to open this water-based poly container, I eventually put it into my paint sprayer container through a strainer. I add 10% water, so I have 600 milliliters, that's 60 milliliters of water, and then I add a few drops of my ash paint so it doesn't cause any cloudiness in the finish. Always do a few test sprays to make sure everything's spraying fine, and then you can get started on your project. I ended up spraying 3 coats of water-based poly. This is a semi-gloss water-based poly. I usually choose the satin, but they didn't have any left in stock. I would rather use satin, but semi-gloss still worked pretty good. After my poly has dried, I ripped the old liners in the drawer out, and then I attached my new hardware, and all that's left to do is attach the new legs. So let's flip this piece over on a blanket so we don't damage anything and get started on attaching these cool legs that I found on Amazon. They're super affordable legs, but the screws that they come with are super small and there's no way they hold these legs in sturdy. So I pre-drilled some holes and used some of my own screws that I had kicking around. Finally, we get all the 4 legs on and we're finished with our piece, but let's take a look at this curbside find one more time before we do this full makeover. And here's what it looks like after. Oh, hi Charlie. Are you gonna help me open the drawers? What do you think? Like it? Are you gonna interrupt the video? You just want to say hi, don't you? Say hi, Charlie.